This is Suzanne Wagner of the C.G. Jung Institute of Los Angeles. In the next hour, you will view a conversation with Dr. Rivkah Kluger, filmed in September of 1979 in the library of the Analytical Psychology Club of Zurich, Switzerland. This was the home of the original Jung Institute in Zurich. For many years, Dr. Kluger was a preeminent Jungian analyst, noted throughout the world for her psychological interpretation of ancient mythology and Old Testament themes. During her life, she published several books, including The Figure of Satan in the Old Testament, The Gilgamesh Epic, and Bible and Psyche. Rivkah Kluger was one of the first Jungian analysts. She belonged to a small circle of students dedicated to Jung and his work during the years he was formulating his essentially new perspectives on the collective unconscious. Life began for Rivkah Kluger in Bern, Switzerland, where she was born in 1907. Her family moved to Zurich when she was very young. She grew up there and eventually studied at the University of Zurich, where she obtained a doctorate in Semitic languages. As a graduate student, she first encountered Jung when he lectured on dreams at the University of Zurich. She then sought him out and was accepted by him as an analytic patient. Soon after beginning her analysis, she changed the focus of her studies and began work on a dissertation on the figure of Satan in the Old Testament. Jung invited her to publish this along with a collection of his writings in a German edition of a book on the nature of the spirit, published in 1948. Later, Dr. Kluger expanded this work and published it as a separate book in English in 1967. As a young woman, Dr. Kluger practiced as an analyst in Zurich and taught seminars in the first years of the training of Jungian analysts. Eventually, she traveled all over the world giving lectures on archetypal themes in ancient texts. In 1955, she married a young American, Yehezkel Kluger, who was among the first people certified as an analyst in the new training program offered in Zurich. The Klugers moved to Los Angeles and began to practice as analysts and to teach in the training program there. After 14 years in Los Angeles, the Klugers decided to move to Israel, where they could be close to family members and continue their work in Jungian psychology in their aging years. In 1987, Dr. Rivkah Kluger died peacefully in her sleep at home in Israel. She is still remembered today for her insightful interpretations of Old Testament themes and for her own passionate spiritual temperament. Her body of published writing places her among the most outstanding analysts of the first generation after Jung. Dr. Rivkah Kluger, very good to meet with you today at the clubhouse at the library of the Zurich Club.
Yeah.
And this is a room you've been in before.
Oh, yes.
Yes. As a student and as an analyst in Zurich?
Yes, and Jung has been often here lecturing, and I have been also lecturing from the beginning of the Institute until I left for America. Mm-hmm. And this room and this house is full of memory of the early time. And it is the club. It is celebrated a few years ago with its 50th birthday. And it's full of memory and atmosphere for me. And I like
Well, I'm glad
to
we could
speak
meet
to you
you
here.
Yes, I'm glad we could meet you here.
Yeah.
Can you tell me something about your own background, where you were born and how you grew up, I believe, in Switzerland and then came to meet Jung?
Yeah, I was born in Bern. And when I was 4 years old, my family moved to Zurich. And I was started with a kindergarten, and my life rolled since there always in Zurich, the schooling, and I made my doctorate in Zurich University.
In what field?
That's interesting. That has to do with my analysis with Professor Jung, because I started first philosophy and psychology, and but then through the analysis, I was landing in being convinced that I have to deal with my tradition. Because I tell you what it was. Once in an hour, Jung accompanied me to the door, and I had a dream, and he associated a Bible passage, and I didn't know it. And he said under the door, "You don't know the history of your people." And that made me start. It impressed me so deeply. I mean, I was brought up orthodox, but there was no special occasion to get connected with the Bible in a scientific way. And I must say that through my analysis with Jung, I really came to understand from a new point of view much more the symbolic depth and greatness of the Bible. And then I had to give up studying because I had no money more, and I interrupted a few years, and then I came back. But then I changed the subject, Semitic languages.
Oh.
And I started to study, especially the Old Testament, and got more and more steeped into it. And that was, and my thesis was the figure of Satan in the Old Testament. And Jung said once to me later, we talked about his Ion and Mysterium Conjunctionis, and he said, "You see, I must explain the New Testament, but the Jews should explain the Old Testament." And that is what then became my task, I would say. And it was for me a great thing that Jung liked my thesis and printed it in his volume of Symbolism of the Spirit. There is my whole thesis in German. And actually, now it's a collective work, so all the pupil works had to be out. But this thesis was in German, Jung wanted to print it. And later, only much later, I don't know anymore the time, I think 1967, it has been as a book published at Northwestern University Press. So, well,
So really out of this contact with the unconscious came a whole new task for you.
Yeah.
And
I always
help you
was
see
very
that.
full of it. I had a lot of, as you see from the start, I had a lot of Jewish archetypal dreams. And I come from a Hasidic family, although I was born and brought up in Switzerland.
I see.
But it was years in Switzerland when I was a student that I didn't know Jung. And then he started to give seminars at the Eidgenössische Technische Hochschule. And I was then working as a secretary in one of the Jewish communities.
Can you give me some of your first impressions of Jung?
Yeah. Well, just what comes right now. You see, I made myself free to, when I heard of these lectures, I had friends who were there, and my boss, I said, listen, at this day I must leave at 5, not at 6. And he gave me the possibility, and I went into that seminar, but I didn't work yet with him. And then I went once I never had seen him before, and then he gave a lecture in the University of Zurich and showed pictures, patient pictures. And in came a man with a straw hat, utterly relaxed, no professor persona, you know. Somebody said once, Jung had a lot of aspects. He can look like a peasant, especially in Bollingen, and he can look like a nobleman. But he was utterly in himself. And he showed his pictures, and I had the feeling he wasn't very eager that it goes over to the people. He did them that if they wanted to hear him, okay, he gave them to hear him. And then rang the bell, and he said in the middle of it, well, now I have to go, or we stop. And he just packed very quietly all these pictures in, and put his straw hat on, and left. He was a most natural person. I would like to tell you an anecdote of which I know. In the time of the students, when the institute already started, the students, especially later when I was already not here anymore, he gave every semester the opportunity to the students of the institute to come to him and put questions. You see. And a young man who was then in Zurich, it was even somebody from Los Angeles, said, naturally the students all wanted to once see Jung. And he was already quite old, but then he invited them to his house. And he said this young man said, there he sat and didn't know what to say and fidgeted around. And Jung said, what do you want? He said, I wanted to see you. And Jung put his chair forward and made like this and said, take a good look. And then the ice was broken, just to tell you how natural he was. I think anyway that people who want to impress are usually insecure. Mm-hmm. And Jung was so much in himself, in my experience, that I thought he didn't need that, you see. And he made people comfortable, not overwhelmed by being with the great man. He just made them comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Well, did you then have contact, were there other Jewish students? Were you one of the first Jewish analysans, or were there others?
There was before where people, Jews, mm-hmm. let's say the Western Jews from Germany. There were a lot. And but from them he didn't exactly get the Jewish meaning and the meaning of Jewishness, and he didn't meet it until some others in Switzerland came, like me, who had a traditional upbringing, and that was a great thing with him. He learned, and he got very interested in it. He said once in the later times, if I would be yet younger, I would start to study Hebrew. And he goes with life, and if you read his memories, he had then, when he was very sick, he had Kabbalistic visions, if you remember. Yeah. So he's very open. If he doesn't understand, he doesn't. But if life brings him something he doesn't know, he goes with it. But this was naturally me and others. We had another background. My parents came from Eastern Europe. Yes. And there were others. And he suddenly, something opened to him, which most of the German Jews were very assimilated.
Yes.
And so he learned more things about Judaism through different Jewish people, you see.
During your years of contact with him, did you have discussions with him about Israel and the question of returning to Israel or not? That didn't come up?
No, that came later. Wait a minute, when did we go? He died in 61, and we went to Israel only in 69.
Yes. So you didn't really talk about that issue with him much?
I really wouldn't know, but then we didn't know yet that we go
you didn't
to Israel. No, no.
That came up in your life later.
Yeah.
Well, in that regard, I had a question to ask you, because you have parents from Eastern Europe. You were born in Switzerland, and then you moved and worked in the United States, and now you have not returned, but you are in Israel, and you live there now and practice and work. So, in a way, your soul has moved through different rootings in the soil. You've lived in different cultures, and I wonder if it has made a difference. It must make some difference to your soul, where you live. And
I want to tell you that I come from, my father was an ardent Zionist, and my sister and I grew up with this, as a matter of fact. It was our mother milk, you see, so to speak. And at that, my sister went very early to Israel as a volunteer in a kibbutz, the hard time of the kibbutzim. But when I left from Zurich to America, it had a very simple human reason. We got married, Yehezkel and I, and he's an American. Old Wicks said once to me, Mrs. Wicks, she was a wise old woman, and she said a woman should never ask her husband to live where she wants. And it wouldn't have occurred to me not to tell him to come to Switzerland because I am in Switzerland, because I always had in the background also Israel.
Well, really, I
came to America in 51 for the first time for lectures, and as you know, Yehezkel came here and made his diploma here, and I went to America, and from America to Israel. I wouldn't say that my soul was, for me it was a natural development. I mean, development by life. Then came a time where we both felt very much that we want to live in Israel. And my family is in Israel. My parents went also to Israel, not from Germany because they had to, but from love of Zion. Yeah. But I naturally was very dedicated to my work here, and that big privilege of my life to have been able to work with Jung kept me. I think everything came in a natural way. And well, I must say that America was not my goal.
No.
If he would have lived in Honolulu, I would have lived in Honolulu, you know. But I think that's natural. And the other impulses is just also the natural to fulfill that Jewish yearning, which is for hundreds of years in every Jew. Some don't know it anymore. But there are even people who come to Israel and suddenly, in an irrational way, get caught from its spirit and go to Israel.
It's a question which must come up a lot for modern Jewish people, because now that Israel does exist and has such a struggle to exist, then comes the question, do they uproot from where they are to go, or does their life go in another direction, and then it's strictly an inner a contact with the depths of the Jewish soul.
I tell you, I have a friend. She came early as a young woman to Israel, and lived in a kibbutz. But then she left. Life was difficult. I wouldn't say that it's not still, that it is not still difficult. But she wrote me a letter a few years ago. She lived in America, she lived in Switzerland. What I think for her to come to Israel. And I answered her, listen, if you look for a comfortable country, then don't choose Israel. But if you have any other reason, irrational reasons, then only then you can take Israel. You see, otherwise we can't compete with the comfort of Switzerland or America. But one can live, and it is very alive if you come to Israel, as you once thought you would to interview me, then you will feel it. But it's not easy.
I've wondered if it is easy to live an introverted life in a country that is so pressured.
It is a pioneer country, you are right.
Yeah.
But I think that is not... One can introvert everywhere if one is an introvert, you see.
Yeah.
But Israel wouldn't have been without a pioneer idealism. Many died by drying the swamps from malaria, and they had not much to eat at the beginning. My sister told me they didn't have to stand in a queue only for the food, but even for the silverware. They didn't have enough, so one stood. But it was the great days of idealism of young people from all countries, especially Russia, away from the pogroms. And also, it is an irrational... you know, in history there is a trend to Israel which never cut off. It was always, a continuous existence, even from the Middle Ages and earlier. And there is a medieval Jewish man who was in Spain, and he wrote poems with a deep yearning for Jerusalem. You see, it never interrupted. That inner, it was continuous, this yearning. But naturally, the practical life is difficult. One doesn't, by no means, one doesn't starve or something like this, but one lives in an insecure situation. You know the name of Ben-Gurion?
Oh, yes.
He was prime minister, and he said once, if an Israeli doesn't believe in miracles, he's not realistic.
Well, let's return to your earlier days in Zurich a little bit. Were you acquainted with Emma Jung?
Oh, yes. And Toni Wolff. And I mean, I belong to the the narrower circle, you see. I didn't belong to this early foreign people from America who spoke only English and came here to stay and work with Jung. There I didn't belong. That means I was still working in that Jewish community, and I couldn't go to this. I could have gone, but I couldn't get free in the morning. It was always in the morning for several years, and it is in all the Jungian libraries, the English seminars.
These English seminars.
And that I was not yet in. Just when it stopped, I would have been free, but I can't complain. I got a lot.
Did you work analytically at all with either Emma Jung or Toni Wolff? Or can you say anything about them as people? What were they like? And
I wouldn't like to go so... I mean, I did work, not with Mrs. Jung, but with Toni Wolff a while, and before I came to Jung and Meyer. But I wouldn't want to describe my analysis anyway.
No.
I think they were both very, very fine women of a great caliber.
Was Emma working on the Grail book any of the time that you knew her?
She worked at it many years, but then she died before it was finished. And you know it, and Marlowe's finished it about alchemy.
Did she lecture on the Grail while you were...
Yeah, she did, once. in the club in 2 or 3 evenings.
And she did the work, very good work on the anima, animus.
Yes, I think that's a classic of Jungian, Jungian writing, especially written by a woman about women.
Yes.
You see, Jung always thought women must write about women. I don't know.
You yourself have done some work on women in the Old Testament.
Yes,
there are
I
many
did.
wonderful
You
women
read it? Yeah.
and stories and mythic,
Well, I lectured
mythic
about it, but I
images.
changed a lot. It's now in Journal of Analytical Psychology. Yeah. Not a lot, but the whole end I changed.
I see. You've
Yeah.
revised it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for me, with what I got from Jung, I felt ideas came. I couldn't help but applying psychology and suddenly see things I never saw before in the holy books.
Well, would it be too personal to ask you how you felt about the fact that Jung had a relationship of such importance outside his marriage? Was that...
I don't want to talk about that. That's too personal.
Okay.
Well, I can only say one thing. Somebody asked me the same question, and I found it a little a curiosity in it. And he asked me, and then I said, you know, there is a Roman saying, quod licet Jovis, non licet bovi. Do you know what it means?
No.
What's allowed to Zeus is not allowed to a bull. I wanted to be a little nasty. It was another way how he asked, not... It was somebody who just wanted to know too much, and I'm not the gossip.
Yeah, well, I'm interested not because of gossip, but it is a kind of fact of Jung's life, and in some ways it may be a psychological
Look, he wrote,
importance.
excuse me,
Yeah.
he wrote a book about himself, and he didn't talk about it. Who am I to talk about it? We
Well,
have
he
to
left-
respect this. I can.
see.
I couldn't else. Yeah.
Well, that's a good answer
Okay.
to the
If
question.
you like it, I'm glad to.
Yeah, good. Do you feel that, what kind of work do you feel that women in analytical psychology have ahead of them? I mean, in a way, Emma Jung and Toni Wolff and yourself are the first really pioneering women in the field, and there's a lot left to do. If you could live
You
a little
see.
bit longer, what direction would you go in?
The direction I will be told by the unconscious. You see, I think one cannot plan these things.
Yes.
It's a fate when you have to write. And I talked once the other day with somebody, I forgot who, that Jung, as you know, he should have been a surgeon, and then it came, he had not to be a surgeon. And I have a feeling there are people, they write, that I learned in America, that in the universities, that one says, publish or
perish.
Or perish. When I think of the Jungians, that is a university thing.
Yes, it is.
That nobody came to writing that way.
I see.
You see, not choosing what would be a good subject and become a bestseller or something like this. That goes on today. Whether it's good or not doesn't play any, has no any importance. I exaggerate a little, but it is a little bit en vogue. But as far as Jung goes, remember when he was sick, and afterwards he wrote
Answer to Job?
Answer to Job. And every work came, I know from him that even his first book, Symbols of Transformation, was connected with a dream. And he said, without this power of this dream, he doesn't know how he could have done it. And you see, if one is on the way of individuation, one is told what to do. And sometimes one doesn't like it.
Can you tell me the story about your father?
Well, when you told me how I came to Jung, there is even a prenatal reason in my fate. I'll tell you why. My father and my mother came both from the Bukovina, Eastern Europe, and they married in Switzerland. They met in Switzerland. My father was a young socialist at that time and Zionist, but he wanted at that time go to America. And he worked at night on the, is it the Caspian Sea in Romania there? Mm-hmm. He worked on boats on the Caspian Sea at nights in order to get the money to emigrate to America. Uh-huh. You know, that was a time where there were many, but not where my parents came from, many pogroms and Eastern Jews came to Europe, especially Russia and all these poor countries. And he wanted to, America was the goal to go, freedom and better life and so on. So he saved money and worked a few years to be able to go to America. He came to Switzerland and wanted to visit, that I didn't tell you, a very fine man who was a well-known, the Swiss Social Democrat. And he wanted to, Greulich his name was, he wanted to greet him before he, on the way to America, he wanted to visit this man whom he very much, and he was a very kind person, a fine person, and he wanted to squeeze his hand and wanted to see him. And he naturally went in a cheap inn in Switzerland, and when he woke up, the whole money was stolen from him. But what did he do? Without this incident, which was as such very unfortunate, he stayed in Switzerland. He had no money, started to work something, met my mother, and they married. And without this accident for him, I never would have known Jung. And at some occasion, I told him, I said, mind you, my father had to lose all that money which he made with blood and sweat, one can say. And look, I never would have known. He said, yeah, that was because you had to come to me. I mean, that belongs also how, but that was, when I said it is, it's just a kind of an anecdote. It was true.
Mm-hmm. And the work
how fate sometimes goes.
Yeah,
we know that.
Yeah.
That something seems to be very bad. I wouldn't say that every disaster is meaningful. It can be destructive, but it can also go very strange ways with suffering in order to reach ourselves, really.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
that's a beautiful story.
Well,
can we go back a little bit now to the subject of women and the problems of modern women? Is there something of a feminist movement in Israel? Are there?
You see,
you know?
I don't think there are a few, but they are Americans who came to Israel mostly.
Are?
Yeah, the leader was an American, but I would say in Israel it's somewhere different because all women have to work. What the husband earns is when they have children. They I couldn't tell you any percentage. You say.
But it's a necessity to work.
Yes, and there are engineers. I worked with a young woman. She looked very feminine and all, and she worked as an engineer. But it is not a fighting thing, you see. As far as I know, we live now there 10 years. It's a matter of fact. It was a necessity of life, that they are in life, and they are teachers, and they are... but it is not this complex with it. The neglected woman, you see. Naturally, the whole Orient is, has a certain masculine privilege. I mean, Arabs, for instance, say go and behind them is the wife, goes behind him with a goat or a sheep, or you see. But in Europe it's also so. It's everywhere there. So, and I would say there is a good reason for the women's lib, but how it goes about it, I find is downright destructive. I think that women must be freer. I mean, there was a time where women were really not allowed even to the universities. Even I went to a lecture of a man, of a famous professor, but he was a social economy, or I forgot what he was, and he had a full auditorium, and he came in and said, meine Herren, ignored the women. Mm-hmm. So he hadn't invited them. They come and he can't help it, but he ignored them provocatively. Mm-hmm. That actually exists. But what I feel with the women's lib, it's all right if they would, and there you have the essay of Mrs. Jung, where she critically deals with the animus of women. And she was very much a woman, beautiful woman. But if we see it from the point of view of analysis, what has woman to learn most? To become objective. That's very hard. Women are emotional, you see. And what the danger is, I can only say, hopefully perhaps only for a while, they hate their femininity. And they hate men, but they want to be like men. It's a big, and then comes this male chauvinist. I mean, that is a great danger, a loss of eros. What does it after all mean that God created us men and women? If there are no opposites, the whole life is full of opposites. And what the women lives do is to work towards the unisex, and and we have the same rights. It's all animals. But what do we do? Naturally, there are women who are really like in prison. Mm-hmm. But what is the freeing from the prison? Mm-hmm. Namely, to work at themselves, for instance, at the animals problem. Mm-hmm. I see a great danger that women don't find themselves as women. They should learn, they should be, of course, but if they do it at the cost of their femininity, I would say that it's a catastrophe in culture. Mm-hmm. Women, if they are, but they must develop the animals. If they want to be, there are women who are quite masculine and therefore doubly want to appear like women, but that doesn't make it. They talk of male, what is it, male?
Chauvinists?
Chauvinists. Uh-huh. It is a humiliation for men, and they should be in, I mean, ideally spoken, they should be in analysis. I'm certainly biased here, but I believe in the effect on the women when they don't lose their eros. For instance, Jung says that open, man needs, the anima is undeveloped and the animus is undeveloped. But if the anima is undeveloped, then they have to work at their anima, and then they need women who understand them, and vice versa. But now to make a big war between them, and wanting to have children, but God forbid being married with men. Mm-hmm. Whether the child is not unhappy or that he has no father, that doesn't count. Mm-hmm. The women have a wrong understanding of freedom. Mm-hmm. That is no freedom. I read quite some books about women's lib, and I was told and consoled in America when I lectured 2 years ago or 3 years ago that they said it's not so anymore, so it calms down, it seems. Mm-hmm. But the separation of the opposites, and not what is the whole meaning of life, the union of opposites, the alchemical coming together of king and queen. I mean, we have also day and light, and we have sun and moon. Mm-hmm. They don't go with the nature of life and what life wants. And Jung writes in one of his early books, The Relationship Between the Ego and the Unconscious, that nothing makes men more angry than women are opinionated. It's very annoying for men. They should develop their animus in a positive way. And then they must live up to help the men with their anima, to understand their anima, and men must also giving a chance to women to be a woman. I could tell you so many out of my practice, so many stories where women are just destructive, and they think they are feminine, you know.
So it leads to a rejection of relationship.
It's a danger. It's a danger for the structure of life, which carries the meaning, namely the individuation. A woman would be somebody who integrates her animus and vice versa, you see. But that is an ideal. But to really come to grips with the animus and feel it and recognizes it. And for men, when a man is very effeminate or moody, then he must deal with that woman in him. And I feel it is a critical situation if Eros goes lost. Which is namely, what is Eros? Bringing together. And there are many, they don't want to talk about the inner life, you see. But it needn't even to talk about it, but to live it. I know an example which I heard about from a patient when I was yet in the States, about a sister of hers also. She was very important, and she was head of a Red Cross office, and she had to go to the meetings, and once she had the husband at home with high fever and the doctor at home with, the daughter at home with high fever, and she went to the meeting. You see, there is a loss of motherliness, but it can also be a loss of femininity. And one reads even about the unisex. I read in one of these books of a woman who said women are very badly treated, even by nature. They have to be pregnant and walk around ugly with a child in their belly, and I tell you, I thought my hair standard. She lost complete identity with femininity.
No appreciation for this mystery that
right.
pregnancy is.
No mystery,
Yes.
it's all fighting. It's all fighting, and it is a desperate thing, and I'm sorry for it, but it's more than to be sorry. I find it downright dangerous. It can be a detour. I always hope it's a detour until they get enough of their own masculinity.
But it is a very difficult thing, this problem of living with the opposites within oneself.
But what is all analysis about? Analysis about the union of opposites. That is individuation. And all this. I must tell you something about the animus. I had a patient. She was connected with another patient, and they were good friends, but she was a little bit, psychically, she was still somewhere with her two children, even, she was still a kind of a teenager. And she liked with that friend to chat every morning in Los Angeles, to chat with her, but she was an artist and she had 4 children, and one day she said to the good old friend, you know, I just can't take that time anymore. And she was very, very hurt and brought up that in the interview. And I told her, you know, she's right. Why can't you respect this? And she took it very bad. I take her side and so on. And then I thought, well, it's hopeless. I won't say anything anymore. And I dropped it. And I had to lead her out of my room, which went through the living room. And suddenly I looked at her eyes in the room first. They were absolutely, you couldn't meet her eyes. They were stiff, in a way. And I had given up to reach her. I saw it's hopeless. And then under the door, the eyes, as it was, melted, they got milder. And she said, under the door, now I understand what you said. And that is the one experience I had so clear of breaking the animus power by me letting go, you see.
By you letting go.
I let go. I didn't try anymore to
have
convince
to.
her.
Yeah.
And then it fell back on her, and she could certainly understand it. There one can see the reality of the animus. Well, just a little example.
Yes. Well, now I'd like to move to something else, which is still a living problem in our time, and that is connected to Jung. It seems that even now, 35 years after the developments in World War II, Jung is accused of being an anti-Semite, and
Yeah, I know.
it's a mystery in a way why this continues, because there have been many important things written around this, and lots of facts have come out. And if one knows much about him or his life, it seems impossible to give any credence to that.
Yeah,
But
you're right.
for you, as a friend and a colleague and a Jewish woman who knew him a long time, I would like to ask you to comment on that. Why do you think this continues, or what are your own feelings about that?
Well, I try to answer first the first thing. There was a campaign coming from America against Jung, you see, and it had to do naturally with the whole situation. I can only say personal. I felt, for instance, that Hitler time, like a poisoning of the air all around, and that can't just disappear suddenly. But I want to say this. I talk now from myself personally. I was many years with Jung, and I didn't experience any anti-Semitism. What I told you, for instance, about he printing very close to that time my thesis in his book. You see, and my name was then Rivkah Schaarf. He didn't say I should call myself another name or so. He did that. I mean, it's far from anti-Semitism. I think that there is another fact which I would like to mention, namely that if one looks at it proportionally, the majority of the outstanding Jungian analysts are Jews. And they were with Jung all the time. And they loved Jung and felt and respected highly his integrity, like me also. And how do you explain that with an anti-Semite? All these Jews, I mean, they would have left him if they would have thought I think. He was, these are very important facts. And I would like to say, I don't want to go deeper into the problem, why and that, because we have a very good essay of Angela Jaffe, which goes into all the details of how this came up and what happened really. I couldn't do that at the spot or so, but this is really I think, a classic, excellent writing about that whole anti-Semitic complex. I call it a complex. It occurs to me really now when you ask to call it a complex. I personally can only thank God that he led me to Jung. And many, as you know.
Yes.
Many.
By the way, what does the name Rivkah mean?
Rebecca.
Rebecca.
You see, Rivkah, the Hebrew doesn't pronounce the vowels. Rebecca, Rivkah. It is Rebecca. Yeah.
And so Jung didn't want
You
to
see,
change
it's like this. Many Jews gave their children in America or in a not Jewish name. Only in the synagogue, when one opens the Torah, they give the child a secret name, and that was with me, Rosa. When I got into the Jewish youth movement, in the Zionist youth movement, I wanted my Hebrew name. But my old friends know me yet as Rosa or Rosie, but my real name is Rivkah, Rebecca. That was a kind of a time where the parents didn't want to stress, on account of anti-Semitism, the Hebrew name.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, now we have just a short time left, I believe.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask you now about how it feels to be growing older. And one of the things in Jung's psychology is the idea that as life goes on, and especially after the second half of life, that really new spiritual tasks come right out of the natural development of the psyche.
I forgot saying something, yeah.
So from a personal point of view, can you say anything about these later years in terms of your experience of facing death, or what Jung said about it? What in your own
I can tell you a
background?
nice little story which shows what he said about.
Good.
He said once when he got older and more tired and with little bebés and bigger bebés, or do you say boo-boos, or I don't know what you say, I don't know. But anyway, he said once to me, you know, I have never been old, I have to learn it. So I also can't tell you, I'm not above it, far from. I like to live and to do more. And, but he accepted, you see, and he said something very important. He said, if one is all preoccupied with death, one is not living anymore. You see, but if one accepts death, it's a new life. Every day is a new life. And from that I live. But not only that. See, I personally feel that death works on us. You know, for instance, I realize one gets certain things which made you put a lot of emotion in it. Suddenly you realize, but you are young. I mean, as much as I am in my age, I'm old. I don't feel always my age, but that I, for instance, get a little calm against my nature before, you see. More distance. More, not I choose, it chooses. But I must tell you something very important. With the Hasidim, there is a word which is called deveikut, to hang on. And I feel that deveikut, that is, psychology, it is our way of individuation, namely, to hang on to the self. With the Hasidim, these mystics, you know what Hasidim are, they have this term, one must hang on to God, not let go, otherwise we fall. And I think in Jungian psychology, you talked in the past with me about parallelism. There is a very fine, important, essential parallelism to hang on to the self. One must hang on because one is not so strong, you see. And then one is in a context. And I think Jung, if I would be asked on one foot what to say is the most important thing, what Jung said, everything is most important, but this obedience, this acceptance of following the self, and that is exactly the same thing. One is not strong enough. I mean, one must hold on. And then one holds on also when one gets the strength to suffer, which is connected with it. And only recently I thought sometime I would like to, just to write about this the way I could, but with you Jungians, and I feel it in absolute parallel. I want to remind you of one thing with Jung. You have read the memories, yeah? Mm-hmm. And he had a dream being asked about things of, I think, Middle Ages men from the Middle Ages, and they put questions to him. And he was on a tour with a friend on the bicycle in Tessin. And in that night he had that dream. And then he woke up and thought he hasn't answered their question. He stopped his tour. He went the same day back to work and his work. I think that is the essence of living from the self.
All the way.
All the way. It's, as you know, it's not always easy. But one can also lose it. The Hasidim talk even about a terrible state of losing God. Mm-hmm. Well, but Jung, I think Jung is such a, not only a genius, he's a precious human being. He didn't say one thing he didn't do himself. You see, he didn't preach ever. Mm-hmm. He talks about experiences which are very potent. Mm-hmm. And I would like to say one word about a certain trend today among the Jungians. One must go beyond Jung, mm-hmm. you know. And I think we are not even there to understand everything of Jung. Mm-hmm. And Jung said he writes for the future. And I must say, it hurts my Jungian heart. Mm-hmm. Because naturally it's, I'm an introvert, that can be the difference. But you know all this too. He is a precious, great, he was a precious, great human being. And obeying to fate. That doesn't mean that sometimes one has to fight something, but we have the dreams. It's really the via regia. I think the term is from Freud. Yeah. But if we live that way, I would say, I don't know how one could, I couldn't stand life without this deep meaning. To become who one is by going the inner way. It's not for everybody, and not everybody has gone through darknesses and whatnot, but it all depends on the unconscious. And if we are open to it and respectful, and I mean Jung's integrity, that belongs to Jung's integrity, like everything.
On the same visit to Zurich, I was able to hold a conversation with Rivkah Kluger's husband, Dr. Yehezkel Kluger, an analyst practicing at that time in Haifa, Israel. Yehezkel Kluger was born in New York in 1911. As a young man, he lived in Palestine and worked for a time on a kibbutz. He returned to New York City, where he took training in optometry. Then in 1951, he traveled to Switzerland to study at the new Jung Institute in Zurich. He said of himself, "I moved from outer vision to inner vision." Yehezkel Kluger was one of the first graduates of the Jung Institute in Zurich. While attending seminars, he met Rivkah Schaarf, an analyst who taught at the Institute. She was someone who had worked closely with Jung for many years. Love blossomed, and in a short time, Yehezkel married Rivkah. In 1955, they moved to California, where they each set up a practice and helped to found the Jung Institute of Los Angeles. In 1969, after many years of nurturing a desire to live in Israel, the Klugers moved to Haifa. They continued to lecture and conduct seminars on Old Testament themes, Jung's answer to Job, and other subjects in mythology and religious symbolism. They helped to found a training program for Jungian analysts in Israel. Toward the end of his life, Yehezkel Kluger wrote a book on the story of Ruth from the Old Testament. This contains a companion essay by his daughter, Toni Kluger, entitled Standing in the Sandals of Naomi. This book came out in 1999. Yehezkel Kluger died in Israel in 1995. He will long be remembered as one of the finest teachers and analysts from the early years of formalized Jungian training. Dr. Yehezkel Kluger, we're meeting today in the Jung Club Library, and this is a room you must know.
Oh, yes. Because when I was studying at the Institute here, the Institute used the club rooms for their classes, and this was the Institute library too. That is, we shared the club library. So I'm very familiar with this room too.
You're practicing now in Haifa,
That's
I
right.
understand. And when did you do your studying in Zurich? You graduated from this institute?
Yes, I was one of the early graduates. I was here studying from spring of 52 until the spring of 55. As a matter of fact, I was one of the first six graduates of the Institute, and we started that student organization, AGAP. And I think I was the one who wrote the Constitution for it.
It's still going, I presume.
Oh, yes, it's still going. It doesn't have the intimacy it used to have when we were just a handful of people who knew each other, but it's still, now it's a part of the international organization, you know, the Jungians.
Who were some of the instructors at that time?
Oh, well, the instructors at that time were those right close to Jung. There was Mrs. Jung, Maya, Barbara Hanna, Marlis from France, Toni Wolff, Ricklin, Bosch, all the, the old timers.
Must have been wonderful.
Well, it was really very wonderful. Oh, and I forgot, most important of all to me is Dr. Rivkah Schaarf. As a matter of fact, I remember when I got my diploma, they always had a little celebration, and the curatorium invited me upstairs and presented me with the diploma, and I had a bottle of wine and so forth. It was just, and I thanked them for the diploma and the possibility of studying here and what I'd learned. And I said I was taking back not only my diploma, but I was depriving them of one of their basic standbys in the faculty, that I was taking Dr. Schaarf to be my wife. So that left them with their mouths open.
They must have been upset and happy all at once.
Yeah, well, I don't know how happy they were.
Yeah, really. Yeah. Did Jung show up much around the place?
Not in the Institute. I would see Jung virtually every other week or so, because he would come to the club meetings. And since Rivkah was my, let's say, girlfriend at the time, I had an in, and I was invited to the club meetings too. So I used to sit, Jung would be sitting up in front in the club. He had a particular chair, leather chair, something like this. And you've seen that L-shaped room there, and I would always pick my seat right in the L, about 2 feet away from him, so I could see the speaker and Jung at the same time and get all his reactions.
What do you think he thought about the formation of the Institute? Did you ever hear his
Well, I'll tell you,
thoughts about it?
I only know that secondhand, and my impression, what I learned about it secondhand, was that he was opposed to an institute, a Jung Institute and so forth, and they talked him into it. As a matter of fact, and interesting, I remember when I got my diploma, it's signed on the face of it by the president of the curatorium and the members of the curatorium. It was C.A. Meyer, president at that time, and then the members of the curatorium. And I was working with Mrs. Jung at the time. I would see Jung from time to time. And I remember after getting my diploma, and I was at the Jung house, and I asked Jung if he wouldn't sign the diploma too. And he said, "Oh no, I don't. I'm not. I'm not a member of the Institute." And I said, "Oh yes, you are." I said, "You're honorary president." So I said, here, I'll write honorary president over, you know, on the name, and you can sign it. He said, oh, I'll write it myself. So I have the only diploma in the world with Jung's signature on the face of it.
Well, what were your impressions of him? Can you remember your first contact with him? Did you ever have an hour with him?
Oh, I had several hours with him. I don't remember exactly how many. I don't know, 5, 8, 10. From time to time. I never worked with him consistently. But since Rivkah worked with him and I worked with his wife, I imagine I was in his in the analysis with him more than the times I visited him. My impressions of him? Well, I remember my first interview with him. That was in Ascona. You know, Ascona down in the southern part of Switzerland. And I knew Rivkah had arranged an interview with me. This was, of course, during vacation period for him, but he was willing to see me. And, I was up the day before that, and I was going through all my dreams and writing down. I had a whole list of what I wanted to talk about. It was tremendous, you know. And I came to where he was staying at the Edanos, at that house there. Very nice open deck overlooking the lake. And I came in and I said, Dr. Jung, I said, I don't know where to begin. I've got such a long list. He says, oh, put it away. He didn't want to have anything of a prepared business to talk about. And I remember he really put me down immediately. I started by saying, you know, I want, and he stopped me right there. I want, he said, I want.
Oh, what an analyst he must have been.
Put me in my place.
Yes, I'll say. And you say you worked with Emma Jung analytically.
Yeah, and C.A. Meyer.
Can you say anything about Emma? She seems to have been a quiet person.
Well, I can say about Emma, I never called her Emma, she was Frau Jung. But she was a very lovely old woman, and very understanding. And I recall maybe there was another fellow student of mine who also was working with her, and we were talking once about our analysis with her. And I was saying, what a gentle, quiet person she is, and how motherly and soft and warm and accepting. And he looked at me in astonishment, or maybe I looked at him in astonishment when he told me, oh no, she's a strenge Herrin, and a very severe lady. And he experienced her as very hard and severe, quite an opposite picture from what I had gotten. So you see, as a good analyst, I see that she reacted according to the needs of the patient.
Did she lecture also? Did you
Yes,
say?
she did. She did. I remember she gave a very interesting lecture, a seminar. One I attended, I recall, is on the Imago by Spittler, on that story he had written. In that story, Spittler speaks about the strenge Herren, and that's where my fellow student got this term from. And I remember in an hour talking with her, and I was praising her. I was telling her, you know, what I thought of her and so forth in very glowing terms, and she blushed, you know. And I said to her, you know, she's much too modest, you know, and she blushed, you know, and I thought that was charming.
Yeah, you really struck a chord.
Yeah.
You once told me a story some time ago about having had a dream that either anticipated Toni Wolff's death or was somehow in connection with it. Could you tell us that story?
Well, that story was that I dreamt that Toni Wolff was laying out cards, like for fortune telling, like tarot cards or something like that. And she laid them out on the table, and a few of us were standing around watching her. And the cards came out, and we all apparently understood what the cards meant. And she said, oh, I see I'm going to die. And we said, oh, no, you know, do it again. So she shuffled the deck and laid it out again. And again it said, yes, you see, I'm going to die. No, that was a coincidence. Do it again. And she did it a third time, and again it came out meaning that, and nobody, of course, we all were still. I remember talking that dream over with Meyer. I tried twisting that this way, that way, the other way to the numbers of the cards, which I've now forgotten. We couldn't make much sense out of it. And 6 weeks later, I was in Basel. And I was in Basel with Rivkah, I forget on what occasion, visiting something there, a museum or a friend. And we came back by train. And during that night, we stayed in Basel overnight. Mm-hmm. And during that night, I had a very sleepless night. And that was unusual for me because I slept very soundly, then and now too. And in that dream, she said, among other things, she appeared in the dream and said goodbye. I'm going, and when I woke up and wrote the dream down, I didn't remember exactly what she had said, where she was going to, but I knew it was one of three places, either Tijuana, or Rio de Janeiro, or Buenos Aires. Oh. And I knew it was one of those cities, I didn't remember which one. Well, I wrote the dream down, as a good Jungian, writes dreams down. We came back to Zurich, and on the train, Rivkah and I were met by Cornelia Brunner, who was subsequently the president of the Jung Club. And she saw us there, and you know what happened last night? Toni Wolff died. And then I understood the first dream. Mm-hmm. And then I understood the dream I had that night. Because the night that she died, I had seen her telling me that, saying goodbye mm-hmm. to me, and that she was going, and when I began to look at the dream, it was clear. She was going west, which is a synonym for dying. Oh. And if you look at the three cities' names, Tijuana is, what does it mean? I think it means Aunt Jane or something like that. And she was really an Aunt Jane. I remember that's one of the girl students here who worked with her told me that she's just like a good aunt, Mm-hmm. And Rio de Janeiro is the river of January, or of Janus, and Janus is the god of the doorways with his two heads facing forward and backward, and he's the god of new beginnings. Mm. And Buenos Aires means good air. Mm-hmm. So all these three cities' names had some relevance to the fact of her passing a threshold or going to where there's a good air, and they were all in the New World, so to speak, from Europe. Mm-hmm. So that's in an instance of a dream, which is prophetic in the first one too, as she was laying out the cards. Mm-hmm. Why I should have dreamt it, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. You worked with her?
No, I did not work with her. I had seen her once analytically for one mm-hmm. session. I knew her. Mm-hmm. I attended her courses. Mm-hmm. I gave her a hard time once as a part of the committee of the Los Angeles Club. Part of the delegation trying to get people to come to lecture to us in Los Angeles, and I sat on her pretty hard, but she didn't want to come.
She didn't want to travel?
No, she didn't want to travel. She was an older woman, and she didn't want to travel, and I kept pressing her. She had told, I don't know whether Jay Dunn or James Kirsch, that I'm a very persistent young man.
That's quite a story, and you didn't really know until after her death to take it on that level.
By no means.
There was no way to know.
By no means.
Yeah.
Even in the dream itself, it didn't occur to me until some hours later I learned she had died that night. Mm-hmm.
Her death was really unexpected, wasn't it?
Very unexpected, so far as I know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm. Though it seems, as I heard subsequently, that quite a few people had premonitory dreams about her death.
I see.
Which I didn't know at the time, and nobody expected it.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any opinions or feelings or impressions? Did it mean anything to you as a student of Jung that he, and as a man, that he had this relationship with Toni Wolff and at the same time was married and obviously well related to his wife? Did that have any significance for you? How could you explain that to yourself? Or did you have any moral objections or?
That's a question which is frequently asked. And it's a question where I don't feel competent to make any comment about it.
Mm-hmm. Can you say anything about typology? For example, what type was Toni? Was she a thinking type, or did you talk about these things as friends? I mean, among one another, try to figure out what you were? Or
No, I don't recall ever trying to type her.
Mm-hmm.
She wrote about the types of women, you know.
Yes. Uh-huh.
But I never tried to type people.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe perhaps in practice I will pay attention to it, but ordinarily...
Mm-hmm. It doesn't come
no.
into your... Uh-huh.
No, I try not to keep my professional life spreading all over into everything else.
What about the idea of living in Israel? Was that ever in your mind as a young man studying in Zurich?
Oh yes. No. I had been in Palestine as a young man.
Uh-huh.
I went there in 1935. In fact, my daughter was born there.
Uh-huh.
And I had every intention to remain there all my life. Oh. I left Israel going back to the States for a visit, but circumstances were such that visit was prolonged for many, many years. So I always was, shall I say, visiting outside of Israel, knowing I would eventually go back.
I see. Never a question that you would return to Israel.
No, and that's where I belonged. I knew that from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm. Did the move to Israel, was it confirmed in your inner life? I mean, did you know?
Oh, well, yes, you see, I went to Israel from Zurich on a trip, on a visit. Rivkah's, my wife's, as you know, sister lived there, and we went to visit her and her husband, and after leaving Zurich and going back to LA and setting up practice, and then after that we would frequently come back to Zurich where Rivkah would give a course, and occasionally I was asked to give a course too. But from Zurich we always made that hop to Israel too, to visit. So we were in Israel almost every year.
Oh.
And I remember one time my brother-in-law, my late brother-in-law, took us to a place in north of Haifa, a suburb of Haifa, and he said, Yehezkel, come, let's grow old together. And I said, yes, I'd like to, because I really loved that man. And we were driving along, and he showed us some places which were for sale in a development project up there. And I looked it over, and I went with him. He sort of, dragged me along to show me, to buy a lot there in order to eventually get a foothold and move there soon. And, well, I didn't have the means at the time of doing anything much like that. And that night I had a dream. And I dreamt that I was riding along the crest of Mount Carmel, and it's on Mount Carmel where this development was planned. And in my dream, driving in a car, I threw out a rolled piece of paper, which was a deed to the land, you see. Oh. And I got up from that dream, I went right up there, and I signed a contract and bought a lot.
That's wonderful. Amazing how responsive that, belonged to you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's beautiful. Well, how many years have you been in Israel now?
10 years.
10. And how do you feel about the future of Israel?
I feel the future of Israel is, rationally seen, very hazardous. Irrationally seen, it's definitely going on.
Mm-hmm. And the spirit of the people is strong, would you say?
No. The spirit of the people is such, you have to say which people, because there are all kinds of people in Israel, just as there are all over the world. And Israel has been through a very, very difficult 30 years of statehood now. Four serious wars in 30 years, being attacked at its very birth. And this last war in 1973, of course, was a serious blow to Israel. Even though we won the war, eventually it was a very dangerous time. We were almost overrun. So there's a great deal of weariness in Israel. But underneath it all is a great deal of awareness that, you know, somebody once asked, what's your secret weapon? Earlier, years ago. The saying in Israel is, our secret weapon is ein brera, which is Hebrew for, we have no other choice. There is no choice. It's here or no place. And that's what keeps us, not only that, but the whole historical fact. The paper I gave in Los Angeles, I don't know whether you were there, on the archetypal background of Israel today, I think shows what a deep-rooted connection there is between the Jewish people and the land of Israel. A very irrational connection, which is the archetypal background for the attachment of the Jews throughout the ages to Israel. So there is no doubt in my mind that it will continue, but not easily. There'll be a great deal of difficulty there.
Are you often asked about the allegations that Jung was anti-Semitic?
No, I'm not asked that often at all. We have a training program in Israel, and it happened that in the last session of one of my seminars there, I was asked that question. And I tried to answer it as well as I could. It's a question which comes up perennially, and the reasons for it have been written so much about, I needn't go into it now. But I don't take stock in the truth of the allegation as the implications given to it. I don't take any stock in it at all.
Do you have any? Yeah. Do you have any idea why these allegations do crop up? Is it just resistance?
One can speculate, and one can find all kinds of ideas.
Yeah.
And of course, as Rivkah told you earlier, you can read about it in Aniela Yaffe's article. So why waste time going over it?
Is there anything you feel is important about your early years in Zurich that you might want to add? Do you feel that the atmosphere is changing in the world of analytical psychology, for example?
Yes, I think so. I think that as it's already breaking up like Freudian psychology did into various schools and to various subdivisions, So I feel that there is somewhat of a watering down. I guess I would associate myself with what is pejoratively called the orthodox Jungians. I think of myself as a so-called orthodox Jungian. I mean, Jung had enough to say that I'm still trying to catch hold of all of it, you see. And I feel that there is a certain kind of a slackening of getting to the depth of Jung because of the attractiveness of other ideas which also exist by right in psychology, but at the expense of really getting into Jung. So that there are too many, I think, of the younger people who are so attracted to the newer psychological developments that they don't sufficiently integrate Jung before they are already investigating other things. And there is a kind of a flattening, I think, I'm afraid, in Jungian knowledge. I'm reminded of a dream a patient of mine had. This was in Los Angeles. And she dreamt that she came out of the sea carrying two tremendous tomes, which were the writings of Jung. And she came out of the sea to a land where there were strange people waiting there to greet her, and these volumes she had, as something which they were awaiting. And this, in the dream, it was 500 years after today.
It's a long time.
Which would, to me, mean that what Jung's contribution will be thirstily awaited centuries to come. So that even though there seems to be some kind of a decline in shall I say, a deeper knowledge of Jung today among the newer generation, I don't have any fear that ultimately he will come into his own, that the world will really understand him more deeply.
Thank you.